Lisa, our executive director, who was going to be next year and do the interview, unfortunately is tied up right now. So I'm not going to do an interview, but I'm just going to introduce Melissa by first saying how fortunate we were to have Melissa in government for all the years that she was, and hopefully she will be back again. This is Women's Month, right?
Yes.
Well, we couldn't have a better woman here at the foundation than Melissa DeRosa, and I mean it most sincerely. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm a huge fan of Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you.
I'm as much a fan of Melissa DeRosa. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa. Maybe you want to speak about your book a bit, okay?
Great. Thank you so much, Angelo. Thank you guys so much for having me. When I got the invitation, I said I have to call my grandfather, would make him, of all the things I've accomplished in my life, being asked to speak at the Italian American Club, the Columbus Club in New York City, tops the list for Gaetano DeRosa, let me tell you. So first, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know. My name's Melissa DeRosa. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, which, as I write about in the book, it was sort of a random thing that my family ended up there. My grandparents came over after World War II from Italy, and when they passed through Ellis Island, Rochester, New York was one of the places around the state that they were routing people to, and where there was a strong Italian-American population that was sponsoring people that were coming over from Italy. My grandparents didn't speak the language. My grandmother was one of 7. My grandfather was one of 4. They both ended up working for Hickey Freeman, of all places. My grandmother was a seamstress, and my grandfather was the floor manager. And my grandfather would always tell this story about how he caught my grandmother's eye on the first day, and her name was Cora Dina. My middle name is Dina, so I was obviously the favorite. But that he fell in love with her instantly. They went on 3 dates, and then he proposed, and that was the end of that. And then 11 months later, they had the light of their life, Giorgio DeRosa, who is my father, who, it's funny, I spent an entire life saying I'm always going to be known as Giorgio DeRosa's daughter, and he told me recently that now he goes places, they're like, are you Melissa DeRosa's father? Finally, in celebration of Women's History Month, I finally turned the tables. It just took 41 years. And I grew up loving government and politics, and more than anything, my dad and my parents. And I used to follow my dad around. He was on the assembly line at GM. He got married really young. He got married at 18 to my mother. They had the 3 of us at 20, 22, and 23. So they were 23 years old with 3 kids at home. They had to put food on the table. They couldn't afford rent, so they moved in with my grandparents, my nonno and nonna, who raised us. And as I write in my book, that house will forever be my heart's home. And we were an Italian family, which meant everything centered around family, food, and guilt. And my father, was involved when I was around 8 years old. He got involved with General Motors. And when he worked at General Motors on the assembly line, he got involved in the local union there, which was the UAW. And unions meant job security, and they meant negotiating strength, and they meant pension benefits and insurance. And my dad got very involved in the union movement. And I used to follow him around and ask him to take me to meetings. And he started working on a local congressional campaign for this woman, Louise Slaughter, who was never supposed to win. And there's photos of me and my sister and brother going door to door and marching in parades, and lo and behold, she wins this race that she was never supposed to win. And I felt that high that's reserved for winning campaigns and unknowing 4-year-olds. And from that moment on, I was hooked. And so when I was 12, my dad was watching Meet the Press, I was watching Meet the Press. He was reading 4 newspapers a day, I was reading 4 newspapers a day. When it was Take Your Daughter to Work Day, he would bring me in tow. I used to have in my office framed this essay I wrote, The Day in the Life of a Lobbyist, that I wrote when I was in 3rd grade. And I essentially talked about, the budget being late and the Senate going home. These are not normal things 8-year-olds talk about, but they were just like part of my vernacular. And then when I was 16, I called in my first political favor. I asked my dad for help getting an internship for the AFL-CIO because I wanted to go to the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And he said to me, you know, listen, Melissa, if I do you this favor, there will be people in this town that never forget it. If you want to be a woman in this male-dominated world, which back then, politics really was. Now it's much more 50-50, but back then it really was. He said, you're going to have to run faster, jump higher, and never let them see you sweat. And it was a lesson I internalized from the time I was 16. And he said, I will prop this door open for you, but you have to push it open and walk through it yourself. And it was sort of, you know, challenge extended, challenge accepted. And I got to work on Hillary Clinton's U.S. Senate campaign for the AFL-CIO, and I showed up first, and I stayed last, and if anyone needed a coffee or a phone rang, I picked it up, and I tried to anticipate everyone's need, and we now live in this bizarre sort of woke society where this generation thinks everything should be handed to them, and they're entitled, and you should leave at 4 and arrive at 10, and don't call on the weekends. I didn't subscribe to any of that, whether it ultimately was to my detriment or not, I don't know, but I attribute that work ethic that was instilled in me watching my grandparents and my young parents and working in those offices to the fact that, you know, my career took off the way that it did. And so I got to be a part of that winning campaign, went to Cornell University. While in college, I interned for Hillary on the Hill in her DC office over the summer between my junior and senior year. And after college, I wanted to be in politics, and I bounced around. I did it all. I did, you know, a statewide Bond Act referendum for Transportation Bond Act in 2005. I worked on a congressional campaign in Brooklyn. I managed a congressional campaign in Albany. I went to grad school following a boyfriend. Fine. I mean, it's funny because I look back on it and I was like, I only have a master's degree because of that guy I was dating. The master's degree lasted. He did not. But you know what? Fun. And, you know, then I really dug in. I was Obama's statewide political director after Hillary lost. I was a Hillary person, and when she lost, I then became an Obama person, but I was Hillary first and foremost. I then, when Obama was president, I was his New York State director for Obama for America, Organizing for America, which I did for 2 years. And then I was offered a job to be deputy chief of staff to Eric Schneiderman, who at the time had just been elected to be Attorney General of the state of New York. I was 28 years old. I was the youngest woman. I was the first woman and the youngest person ever to hold that role. And I oversaw his legislative portfolio, his press portfolio, his executive operations. I got really involved in a lot of high-profile cases that the office was taking on. And it was really exciting, but I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't really want to be there. And fast forward 2 years, my boss was leaving to take another job. Eric sat me down and said, do you want to be my chief of staff? And I sort of hesitated. I said, I'll do this on an acting basis, and we'll see. And you know, the minute essentially that the New York Times ran a story saying that I had just been named chief of staff to the Attorney General, at this point 29, woman, youngest, first female, I get a phone call from Andrew Cuomo, who I joke to him all the time. I'm like, you saw that news story and you're like, Eric has that shiny object, I'm gonna take it away. And they said, you know what, come be our communications director. And I thought it was a little bit of a step back. I said, you know, I'm honored that you're asking me, but I'm chief of staff, and you're notoriously this tight-knit group of older Italian men. It was Joe Percoco, it was Larry Schwartz, Howard Glazer, Drew Zambelli, this group that had been around with Mario, that had followed them into the governor's office. And I said, you know, how do I know that I'll be part of the inner circle and actually make decisions? I care about influencing things, not just titles. And also, I don't know that I want to be a comms person. I'm now a chief of staff. You know, I sort of broke out of this media mold. And he said, here's the thing. Going from the AG's office to the governor's office is like going from JV to varsity. And the pitches come fast and straight at your head, but you're going to learn so much more here, and you're going to impact so many more people's lives. And I promise you, you're not going to regret it. And I took the leap. And the truth is, it's where I had always wanted to be. And I remember jealously sitting on the sidelines in 2011, when Andrew Cuomo legalized gay marriage in New York, making New York the first big state in the country to recognize that civil right, which ultimately changed the course of the civil rights movement around the LGBTQ community. When the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, they specifically cited what New York did in 2011. In the aftermath of Sandy Hook, Andrew Cuomo was the first person to step up and pass real comprehensive gun violence control when Washington did nothing. They tamed the budget deficit. They were reining in taxes. They were doing all these things that I wanted to be a part of. And the Cuomos, I mean, I have pictures of myself as a kid at rallies for Mario Cuomo. It was such a proud thing for my grandparents and my father that, you know, the Cuomos were this larger than life Italian family in New York who gave back to the community. And so I went in and I was all in. And after a year of being communications director, I was promoted to strategic advisor. A year after that, I was chief of staff, named chief of staff, and then 2 years later, I was named secretary to the governor, which is the highest unelected position in the state of New York. And I was 34 years old and the first woman and the youngest person ever to hold the role.
Bravo.
And it's a great title, and it was exciting and history making and all of that, but none of it mattered unless what I did while I was there touched people. And I went to the governor and I said, I really want to set up a council for women and girls, and I want to prioritize IVF, and I want to prioritize surrogacy, and I want to prioritize giving money to women-led venture capital funds, and I want to prioritize daycare for low-income families. And he said, go. He literally handed me the reins and he's like, you're empowered, go. Whatever you can get done, get done. When I was at the negotiating table, he said, this is you. And all was fine and good until one day on February 28th, 2020, when my phone rang and the health commissioner was on the other end of the line and said, COVID is in New York. And like that, life was over. And I lived in Brooklyn Heights with my now ex-husband, and I packed my belongings and I went up to Albany for what I thought was going to be 2 weeks, and I didn't come back for 6 months. And when it was during those days, those 111 days during COVID, when you think about, or when I dreamed about as a child what government could do, put someone on the moon, fight back against the Nazis, all the things government does in its greatest moments. I never dreamed I would be in a position during a once-in-a-century pandemic where every decision we were making changed lives. And when COVID hit New York, Donald Trump was in the White House, and whether you agree with him or don't, and I'm not here to get into any of that, there was an abdication of leadership at the federal level, and Andrew Cuomo became the de facto commander-in-chief. And during those days, I mean, when I tell you, we didn't sleep, we didn't eat, we didn't see family, we didn't know what was going on. The health officials in this country, from Fauci on down, had no idea what they were talking about. I mean, and I was someone who grew up believing in medicine and science and government, and every day they were telling us something different. And masks work, masks don't work. It transmits through the air, it transmits on surfaces. Remember when we scrubbed groceries?
Yes.
Just, I mean, crazy things that we did during those days because literally nobody knew. And it was that moment when it was sort of like, you're called up, and they're like, it's you. There is nobody else. And the book that I wrote, which there are copies here for all of you to take for people who haven't read it yet, the book starts in essentially January of 2020, because when I think about where that story begins and ends for me, I talk about how in January of 2020, my ex-husband and I were in the process of getting separated, and it was our therapist's idea. We were going to take 3 months to not speak to each other, and he worked for Uber at the time. He was going to go to San Francisco and work out of the San Francisco office, and I was going to stay here, and it was going to be pure silence for 3 months to decide, you know, are we in this, or can we live without each other? What are we going to do? And I write in the book, the opening of the book, I raced down from Albany. I was up there working on the State of the State, And I arrived, we go out for dinner at the River Cafe in Brooklyn Heights. We lived in Brooklyn Heights. And we're going over sort of the ground rules of what the separation is gonna be. And he's like, we can't talk for 3 months. And I was like, well, we really can't talk. And he's like, these are the rules. We can't talk unless it's an emergency. And I said, well, what defines an emergency? And he says, well, I don't know, but when it happens, we'll know. And then it was, as I write in the book, like, bam, COVID comes. And I talk about the moment when I'm like staring at my phone and I called him and he's like, is everything okay? And I'm like, how you said I wasn't supposed to call unless it's an emergency? It's an emergency. And it was in that moment when I remember wondering, like, if the life as we knew it was going to exist the next day or the day after that, and how scary it was. And I try to take people into the room as we were making those decisions, on the phone, with Jared Kushner, with Donald Trump, with Bill de Blasio, with Andrew Cuomo, how we were making decisions, why we were making decisions, what information we had, what information we didn't have. Because I think so much of what happened has been so distorted and so politicized and weaponized. And I think that as a people, not just as Americans, not just as people who lived through this period of time, but specifically as New Yorkers, we were the global epicenter of that pandemic for those days. And I think first and foremost, the people of New York deserve to know what was happening, not through the press, who has their own agenda, not through second and third hand sources, but from somebody who was in the room and someone who lived it. So that's why I wrote the book. I felt a responsibility to my family. I felt a responsibility to my administration and Governor Cuomo. I felt a responsibility to the public, and I felt a responsibility to myself. And a dear friend of mine, Huma Abedin, said to me, at some point, you have to take your life back. Because if you let them, the press, politicians, people who hate you, the people who want to, whatever, if you let them, they'll take all of it. And at some point, the only person that can take it back is you. And that was a big reason that I wrote the book. And I take you through the scandal, or I take you through the pandemic, I take you through George Floyd's murder, I take you through the riots that went on in New York City. A lot of this, even though it wasn't that long ago, I think almost as a coping mechanism, a post-trauma coping mechanism, we all distance ourselves from it and tell ourselves it wasn't that bad, or it feels a lot longer ago than it was, and it wasn't. And I think confronting what happened is important to learning from what happened and going forward. And then I take you through the takedown of Andrew Cuomo and the scandal and the good, bad, and the ugly. And I sort of let people decide for themselves, once they have the facts, what to do with those facts once you're armed with information and how you feel about it. But this state was robbed of a real leader. And the country was robbed of a real leader and a competent administration. And there is not a day that I wake up and read the newspapers and just shake my head and say what could have been. Whether it's looking at this migrant crisis that has gone out of control far too long, or the crime on the subway, or. And now staring at November, faced with a choice that nobody wants to make. We are where we are, but it doesn't mean that it has to be this way. And I think information is power, and I think power breeds confidence for people to get engaged and involved, and that's what I hope comes from anyone who takes the time to read the book. So that's my spiel.
We're going to open up for questions, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yes.
One second.
One second, he said.
Thank you, Mary. I had the privilege to know the governor and Melissa, of course. Personal note on Melissa, several years ago, she called me and she said the governor would like to nominate you as a board member of CUNY. I'm the first Italian American over 20 years to be a board member of CUNY. That's thanks to Melissa and to the governor. And I proudly serve. But I said this to the governor, and I'll say it to all of you, and I think Melissa kind of has, mentioned it when she was talking. Our United States is missing a great leader, because I think, as I said to the governor, your problem was you were just too popular. People loved you across the country, and unfortunately, his demise was people were jealous, and people did not want him to go beyond where he was, because he should be the nominee for president in 24. That's my personal view, and I'll stick by it 100%. Now, any questions from anyone in the audience? Oh, I'm sorry.
I have two.
You only allow one, but Mary.
The first one's an easy one. Where did you get those beautiful cloven eyes?
These are my mother's eyes.
Yes. Now, the second one, you mentioned about the legislation about same-sex marriage and referring to it by the term of marriage. Did anyone seriously consider having the same rights? Two people could agree to be responsible for each other, they would also get the benefits and all, but in the hopes of keeping together, people together rather than separating them, use the term, a new term, different than marriage. Because I think that would have made, the churches and all would have agreed. I'm nothing upset about it. Did anyone put that forward, or it was politically impossible?
No, I mean, look, that was where the country was. That was where Obama was when he ran for president in 2008. It was modern day equivalent of separate but equal. And that wasn't something that Andrew Cuomo felt comfortable with. It wasn't anything I ever felt comfortable with. I mean, the reality is, and I write about this in the book, Elise Stefanik, who people may or may not know in this room, those of you who've read the book know this, Elise Stefanik and I were childhood friends. We went to the Albany Academy for Girls together. We ran together for student council. We were buddies for a very long time. We don't speak anymore. But I actually write about in the book, she and I had this debate. And she said, marriage is a religious thing, and this should be separate, and they can have all the same rights, but it shouldn't be called marriage. And I said to her, marriage is by definition a contract granted by the state. It's actually not religious at all. The ceremony being in a church or being in a temple, that is religious, but marriage as an institution is a contract granted by the state. And so essentially my view has always been that asking people who are same-sex couples to settle for anything less is as backwards as sort of Jim Crow laws. And so I understand the sentiment, and I know it's something my grandparents struggle with. I know it's something that the church has struggled with for a long time, but I do think that as a contract that's granted by the state, everyone should be equal.
Next question.
Angelo, Ms. DeRosa, I have to say one thing. During the pandemic, my wife was part of the families from Rochester. But during the pandemic, I used to pick up the channel on and watch and listen. And that really, those 2 or 3 years, I have to say Andrew Cuomo sort of like gave me insurance that we were going to go ahead and beat the pandemic. And I used to see you to the left of him, and I said, boy, I would like to meet this young lady. Oh, yeah, thank you, Angelo, I'm here. But it really was a lifesaver for many of us who could not escape. We had to live here in the city. We had to go through the whole damn thing. I mean, I recall Park Avenue, where I was living at that time, not a car passed by for 1 year. You didn't have a store. And we lived there. I was thinking maybe I'll go back to Italy. I'll live there. No, I'm going to hang out. And I would put that thing, all right, then we got de Blasio a little bit, and I know there was a little problem with de Blasio and Cuomo, but honestly, I think, and I say this as a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a registered Republican, but I say that as Andrew Cuomo, and I'm very sorry because I think, as Angelo said, he would have made a great candidate.
Yes,
of course. Yes. So, unfortunately, let's hope.
I have to add a little anecdote. I'm not a de Blasio fan, I'll tell you right up front. A couple of things. Once when I was wanted to have the Columbus statue or Columbus Circle, part of the historic monument here in New York City. I sent an application through an attorney, and within a week I got a refusal. I approached Andrew Cuomo. He said, he reassured me that that statue wasn't going anywhere. And it was through his efforts that that statue is on the state and national registries as a historical monument. So I don't believe anyone's gonna move it at any time. But one more thing, I'm sorry,
No,
Melissa. I wrote letters to the former mayor's wife in reference to Mother Frances Cabrini and a statue in her name, because she received the most votes. They did this, thing about how many votes, and she received the most votes. I got this form letter back that wasn't gonna happen. Andrew Cuomo on Columbus Day said, within a year, I'm gonna have a statue for Mother Frances Cabrini. And within a year, it was built. And not only did he make that commitment that it was gonna be built, but it was done incredibly well. And I hope that everyone gets an opportunity, if you have it, to go see it downtown. It's really very special, but it's because of him. It's because, amongst many other things that he's done, but that statue is there. I'm sorry. It's at Battery Park City. It's behind the museum, Holocaust Museum, and it's incredible. It faces Ellis Island, and it faces the Statue of Liberty, and it was just incredible. And to his word, on Columbus Day, following year, it was built and it was unveiled. So I'm sorry, I got a lot of great memories of your former boss.
No, and I appreciate the kind words about the press conferences. It's funny because, during that period of time when the governor sort of became this global figure, where it was like we were getting all these letters, people would set their alarms in Poland to watch him. We were getting things from, Asia, from South America, everyone would watch us. And it was really funny because I have two friends who are abroad, they live in Hong Kong, they're both reporters. And they told me that everyone they knew in Hong Kong watched the press conferences, and one day they were watching them with their friends. And one remarked to the other, like, isn't it funny to see Melissa up there? And all their friends were like, you know the girl? You know the girl? Yes. They're like, her name's Melissa. The girl? You know the girl? But it was just funny because I said, we were just doing our jobs. Like the same way that we did them for the 11 years that he was in office. It's just that the stakes all of a sudden had never been higher, and we were doing it on a global stage. But there was an article that I read at some point, one of the glowing articles about him at his height, when someone said, the moment, it wasn't that Andrew Cuomo rose to meet the moment rose to meet him, because this was what he was built for. And the truth was, the administration thrived sort of on management and taking control and making sure there was order, and you need to build field hospitals, we're going to build field hospitals, and you need, and just it all came together and it all worked. And I think back, because people ask me a lot, was it a mistake that he didn't run for president in 2020, because he would have won? And the truth of the matter is, it's not a mistake, because if he were running for president in 2020 when COVID hit, then no one would have listened to him, because everything he did would have been viewed through a political lens as someone who wanted to be president. And what the world needed in that moment was a leader. And if he were running at the time, it never would have worked the way that it did. So I actually thank God that he didn't make the decision to do that at that time, even though I think that the country would have benefited from his leadership down the line.
Yes.
Hi there. Thank you. I was wondering, aside from the obvious and unfortunate consequence that when Governor Cuomo resigned, you then lost your job, have you felt that there have been other adverse consequences in either your professional life or your personal interactions because of one man's perceived transgressions, which I'm not here to debate, but that somehow it's always like the woman in the orbit that has some kind of negativity associated with you as well, and are you still feeling that to this day?
It's, and I write about this in the book, like at some point he stopped being the target and I started being the target. And all of a sudden, it was like people were putting up billboards being like, Melissa DeRosa, are you proud of his words and actions? And my shoes became a thing. There was this whole thing for a while. I wore Christian Louboutins. Okay, I wear a lot of different shoes, but there was this fixation in the media that I wore these expensive red bottom shoes and I was dressed well. And what did that mean? And I was so, it was funny because I spent so many years trying to prove to everyone around me that I deserved to be in the room. I did what my father said. I ran faster, I jumped higher, I never let anybody see me sweat. If I was in a room full of people, I didn't care if they were 40 years older than me, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, I knew more than all of them. And I did because I woke up earlier and I read every single newspaper and I educated myself and I asked a million people a million different questions. So I knew that there was no one in the room that knew more than me. And in those bizarre months when that Me Too scandal was unfolding, the press objectified me in a way that no man that I ever worked with ever did.
Yeah, it seemed like an amazingly gendered response from an observer.
It was so crazy. And it was Rebecca Tracer from New York Magazine wrote this insane piece where she told this story about how a woman said that I walked into a bathroom and I looked through her. And it was like I was the meanest person in the world. And I remember reading this story and I'm like, I was going to the bathroom. I don't even know what you're talking about. You don't name who the person was, but like, it's not an overstatement to say my job was to run the state of New York. Is it possible that when I was going into the bathroom, my mind was on 10 different things that I was going to the bathroom? And by the way, would you ever write that about a man? Would you ever be like, a man went to the bathroom and looked through another man and they were so, give me, what year is it? But like, that's what it became. And it was all of a sudden, you know, I got a question at a recent event that I did where they said, do you ever feel like you brought it upon yourself because you were too attractive? And I was like, I don't even know how to, first of all, thank you. But I don't even know how to answer that question. Like, so what are you saying, that like women should be expected to look dowdy and not be who they are or dumb themselves down or whatever in order to not stick it? Give me a break. And so, yes, the answer is absolutely yes. And look, on a personal level, I'm very open and honest in the book about the dissolution of my marriage, about infertility issues that I was dealing with. And a lot of people say to me like, wow, you're so vulnerable in the book. I talk about losing my grandmother, what that did to me. I talk about how at the end of the day, I would call the family members of the healthcare workers who died. And then I would literally close the door to my office and lay on the floor and cry. Because it was like the weight of everything. But at the same time, I never wanted anyone to see any cracks or imperfections, because as a woman, don't be hysterical, don't be emotional, don't do that. You know, we are under a lot of pressure to be a certain way. And the reality is, and I think about what Huma had said to me, it was taken from me anyway. I was turned into this bizarre caricature. And my marriage and the fallout of my marriage was splashed all over page 6. And I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to write about it and own it and tell the story as it actually happened, as opposed to what everyone has said. But yeah, no, the stereotyping, the targeting of women is so real in these situations. If I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't believe it. But you know what? Look, at the end of the day, you've got two options. Slink away, or you fight back. And I said this in another interview, it got a lot of pickup, and the governor said this to me. Politics is like boxing. You are in a ring. In every ring, there are multiple rounds. And when you get in that ring, one thing you can be sure of is you're going to get punched in the face. The question is, do you get back up? And I said to myself, when everything was over, they have not seen the last of me. And I'm getting back up. And like, life is options. And so that's what I decided to do.
God bless you.
Would you be kind enough to clue us into the truth about what was, I would say, the most serious accusations against him? Maybe the nursing home situation.
So the nursing home situation, which, God, I could do 3 hours on, but the short version is March 2025, the health department issues guidance based on federal guidance saying you cannot reject someone to a nursing home solely on the basis of their COVID status. It was modeled off of guidance that was put out in the 80s about AIDS, when they said you cannot reject someone solely on their status of HIV. That's what it was modeled off of. New York was one of 11 states that had similar guidance. It was done at a time when the belief was that there were nursing home patients that were in hospitals who had gone in as COVID positive, but were no longer contagious and were medically stable, but taking up hospital beds. Because people were afraid that people were, like, at that point, every academic institution, every major consulting firm in the country projected that New York was on track to need 140,000 hospital beds, and our entire system has 50,000 hospital beds. We were going to be Italy, where people literally died in hallways on gurneys because you couldn't get them into a hospital bed. That was the fear, which, by the way, never transpired, in large part because of our press conferences, because the governor asked people to stay home and they listened, and we crushed the curve in a way that no medical professional predicted. But that guidance goes out. 6 weeks later, the guidance was overridden. Once there was testing capacity, they said you have to have 2 negative tests before you go back into a nursing home. The staff was tested twice weekly, etc. Fast forward to June, July, election season's getting pretty hot. Janice Dean, the New York Post, Donald Trump picked this up as an issue. They see that COVID's hurting Trump and the Republicans. They go after 4 Democratic states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, all with 4 Democratic governors who are all very pro-Biden and anti-Trump. And they make this the answer to Donald Trump screwed up COVID. And what's so incredible about what happened was every study that's been done in New York, in Michigan, nationwide, in Europe, in Asia, nursing homes all had the same issue, which was that COVID was brought in by staff during a period of time when no one even knew COVID was here. COVID was here in December and January. We didn't know we had our first confirmed case till March 1st. That's what happened. It had nothing to do with this policy. And the way you know it was all political and weaponized is that there were 11 states that had very similar policies, 6 of which were Republican, that you never hear about. It was the brilliance of the Fox News, New York Post, Murdoch echo chamber that made this an issue. And to this day, literally today, Congress just subpoenaed Andrew Cuomo to come in and talk about this, literally earlier today. And his lawyer had been going back and forth in good faith and said he'd come down and happily give them testimony, but they wanted the press story, so they did a subpoena. Are they looking at any of the other Republican states that had the same guidance? Nope. Are they calling them down into Congress? Nope. And it's the definition of governmental malpractice, and it's why no one trusts anything. It's the same reason that, in my view, Alvin Bragg shouldn't have done what he did with Trump. Because when you start playing games with justice system for politics, no one believes it. And when you start doing it with medicine and science, no one believes it times 2. And now you have polio outbreaks and measles outbreaks because no one's taking vaccines anymore, and these are the consequences of the political actions of our leaders right now that we're going to see for generations to come.
Michael, Lorena.
Hi. Melissa, I have 2 questions. By the way, I'm 66 and I was told by the CDC that I should get my COVID vaccine, so I'm going to get it. What is your prediction for what Andrew Cuomo's going to do? Is he going to run for mayor? Is he going to run for Senate? I don't know about that. And then I'd like to hear about what your plans are.
I don't know what Governor Cuomo is going to do. Here's what I will say, knowing him as I know him, as long as I've known him, he's not done. And I think that he looks around and he's so frustrated by incompetence at every level of government right now. And he's Mayor Cuomo's son. He grew up Queens boy who loves this city and loves this state, and I think it's killing him. The number of times I've listened to him in the last 6 months where he says, Melissa, we are at a turning point. The next 3 to 4 years is gonna define the next 3 to 4 generations in this city and in this state, and we've gotta turn it around. And I can see it, and I can hear it, and the wheels are turning. He wants Eric Adams to succeed. He's friends with Eric Adams. If Eric Adams succeeds, New York succeeds. The end. Politics is timing. Politics is luck in some ways. Politics is unforeseen openings. So who knows what it will be. I don't see him running for Senate. He's an executive. I don't see him being one of 100. I don't see him being one of 435. But I don't think he's done. And as I joked to somebody here earlier, he's only 65, so by today's standards, he's basically a genius. He's got time. I don't know, but as I have said, I am highly critical of the current governor. I have made no bones about voicing that criticism, and I am a strong believer that if you are going to criticize other people, you better be prepared to get in the ring yourself. I never thought about running for office. I always felt comfortable being the number 2. I especially enjoyed my anonymity and the fact that I got to be in the background, and then that was all kind of taken away. So at this point, what do I have to lose? So we'll see. But more and more, I'm thinking about doing it myself.
We'll take two more questions. Two more.
Missy.
Another question? Someone has another question? I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Hi, Melissa, thank you. I'm a banker, and I had the pleasure of banking the gaming industry. And I read the Times, read the Journal, read the Economist, and so forth, so I look at both sides of the fence. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting one Steve Wynn. And Steve Wynn basically, to me, was a great guy, great individual, one-on-one, was fantastic. But he got a very negative article in the Wall Street Journal. And the same thing kind of happened to Andrew as well. So when you read these articles, you think, oh, there's a conviction before the trial, so to speak. So what's your thoughts on that in terms of how you view that and so forth?
I don't believe anything I read anymore. And it's a terrible, terrible place to be, because I grew up as such a news junkie. I mean, it's funny for people who don't do what I do, or who aren't involved in government politics, or who haven't been in the media or subjected to media scrutiny before. I grew up with this false belief of objectivity. At some point, the media became a business, and I was on Bill Maher, and the guy who was on Bill Maher with Scott Galloway, who's a brilliant guy, he's a professor. He was talking about how algorithms reward negativity, and how Twitter and Facebook and all of these things are now geared towards the more emotion it provokes, the more it promotes an article, the more clicks it gets. And what is the strongest emotion of all? Anger. There's no emotion stronger. And so these things are now all written, geared to provoke anger, hatred, negative feelings. And I would just suggest that if you read something and it doesn't seem right to you, do more research. And warn other people that what they're reading is likely not true, because you're not even getting half the story at this point, you're getting like a third of the story.
Okay, one more, yes.
So I agree with the whole click and Facebook and all that stuff on the junky social media, but I think love is stronger. So, and I don't connect with the hateful stuff, I connect with the love stuff. And I just wanted to send a question. Thank you so much for writing this. It's so inspiring. I have 2 daughters in their 20s, and I want them to be like you. perseverance and your grit, you're amazing. I read this book and I was like, I love her, like I texted the author, I was like, yeah, amazing, and I hope, like, just so there's so much support behind you from women who wanna see women like you have power.
Thank you.
Thank you, and
And I will just say, like, I won the lottery when I was born. Not because we were born with money or with things. We weren't. Like, everything I had was born from love and the labor of love and my parents and my grandparents. And I agree with you. And the governor used to say that in all the press conferences, the strongest four-letter word is love, not hate. And if more of us subscribe to that, maybe the world will be a better place.
When Governor Cuomo wrote his letter of resignation, made that speech, he talked about it because he had love for the state, love for this country, and it's in the book. Yes, it is, and that's why he resigned, and for no other reason, unfortunately, for all of us. And God willing, he will be back bigger and stronger someday.
Angelo, you didn't touch one thing though.
Oh, sorry.
And this is maybe a touchy thing with women. What's your take on how the women acted towards Angelo? I have my own opinion.
Well, I can tell you that
Not at you.
No, well,
From a
do
woman.
you mind if I?
From a woman.
Okay. I was at the governor's, I call him the governor, sorry. I have too much respect for him. Many years, he would come to the gala, of course to the parade. And I'd walk him through the gala, through the room. Every woman in the room wanted to take a photo with him. Every woman in the room wanted to put her arm around him. So I'm sorry, ladies, this nonsense about what he did, I'm sorry.
Nonsense, you're right.
In my personal experience, I cannot tell you how many times I had kind of the interference. So anyway, I'm sorry, Melissa.
No, I mean, look, I write about this in the book, and it's something I think people should not be as afraid to say as they are, because everything is so touchy and everyone's scared of getting canceled. But look, like, the Me Too movement was overdue and a necessary societal course correction on a lot of levels. It did not, I think, set out to be about touching someone's face at a wedding, or putting someone's hand on someone's waist for a photograph, or kissing someone on the cheek, or walking out of a room and saying ciao bella. And I think that the danger of where we have gotten today with the Me Too movement is that when you equate those things to assault or rape, you cheapen assault and rape, and suddenly no one takes anything seriously anymore. And I think that there are certain conduct which is old-fashioned, and maybe you should adjust to those things. I think that certain things require training if you're a little bit out of step. Certain things require an apology. You don't want to be kissed on the cheek? Okay, then it's your right to say, I don't want to be kissed on the cheek. So apologize. That doesn't mean your life is over. You know, some things require being fired if they're real and they've been investigated and proven and it's wrong, and some things require going to jail. But when you lose the calibration between that gradation, that's where you lose your way. And my fear as someone who has fought for women, stood up for women, tried to be an example for women, knocked down, glass ceilings, is that we're gonna end up setting women back by not understanding that. And that, I think, is the biggest risk of all.
Let's go forward, not backwards.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, well, I don't know if we could have had a better night than we had tonight. I'm sure that when you get home and you start reading the book, you're not gonna be able to put it down. So enjoy every page. As I said to Melissa, some give you tears, and others makes you feel good because we all lived through those times. So Melissa, from my heart, I thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Angela. Again, it means so much to me, and I said my family, of all the accomplishments, I think they're most proud that I was asked to speak at the class. And you'll see in the very beginning, the book is dedicated to my nonna, who's no longer with us, but I hope that you enjoy it, and as Italian Americans connect with parts about it where I do talk about our heritage and my family, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me.